Listening to How I Sell, a podcast built for early career sales professionals. You'll hear stories, best practices, and guidance from top sales leaders on what it takes to become a sales superstar. Today's episode is made possible by Ramped Careers. Ramped is on a mission to build the next generation of workforce-ready talent.
Hey everybody, welcome back to How I Sell. I am your host today, Leonard, and today we have a very special guest joining us. It's Mariah Donnelly, the Senior SDR Manager at Greenhouse. Mariah has over a half decade as a sales leader and has spent the last 3 years specifically leading the sales development management team over at Greenhouse. Mariah, it looks like you and I have actually taken nearly an identical path in life. We both hail from Minnesota. I'm from Minnetonka. It looks like you went to Wayzata though. And then we went straight into a Big Ten school. You obviously went to Wisconsin. I went to Michigan and then jumped into sales tech. So I'm curious to know how that path evolved for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I kind of feel like I fell into sales in some way. I don't know how you got in, but I was an econ poli-sci major, which is kind of a whole lot of nothing when you're in college. Like, what path do you take? Where do you go from there? I had a background in debate. That's what I did in high school. So I love speaking, love articulating, love persuasion. So it kind of led me to this path to explore sales careers. But I was not familiar with the tech world at all. My older siblings weren't in tech. The people around me weren't in tech. So honestly, I feel like I kind of fell into sales. I remember I started just researching tech companies I was interested in, and then just looking at roles that I felt qualified for. And I think when you're a new college grad, you really don't know what that is, but sales roles just kept popping up. I found a company I was really interested in. It was called shopseeks.com. And I found that the head of sales was a former Badger, actually. So was a Wisconsin alum. And I emailed him, did some cold outreach, not even realizing that sales, landed an interview, and kind of the rest is history.
Nice. I love it. I love it. I won't hold it against you that you were a Badger coming from Minnesota, but all good. No, Wisconsin's a great school. I actually had a security deposit down at Statesider before choosing Michigan, which so could have picked a totally different path there. So I want to take you back a little bit further to see if there's some kindling that started to emerge. But what were your formative years like? Who were you before actually choosing that sales career?
I'll start with high school. I kind of touched on this briefly, but debate was my main activity in high school. I spent my summers doing debate research, going to debate camp, which is so nerdy to say in retrospect. Went to Michigan actually for 7 weeks.
Sweet.
Because they have a great debate team. And so I spent a lot of my time in high school, doing debate club, getting into politics and economics, and then applied to colleges, but actually took a bit of a different route. Instead of going straight into college, I took a year off and lived in Brazil through a gap year program called Global Citizen Year. The program is really designed to help, American youth. I don't love that phrase, but I don't know, young adults that have just graduated high school, not find themselves, but go experience the world. And not in a way that feels go fix this community. You have to go fix something. Rather, the goal was for us to be humbled and see how the other half lives, or another part of the world lives. So I did that for 9 months. It was crazy insane. I went to Carnival. I experienced the police going on strike, so they had to send in the Brazilian National Guard. It was a really informative year. I really learned so much. And from then I went into school, and after living abroad and being in Brazil for a year, I realized school wasn't really where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. Academia is great, but a classroom is only going to teach you so much. So I had 3 amazing years at Wisconsin. My goal was to graduate early. I did it in 3, learned a lot there. And then, yeah, wanted to get out of the Midwest, unfortunately, as fast as I could. I know, Danny, we're both from Minnesota and we both went to school in the Midwest. I love it. It's a great place to grow up. It really informed who I am, but I really wanted to get to New York and leave the Midwest. I love the East Coast mentality of being direct and not, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like not apologizing for wanting to be successful or be career focused.
Yep.
And so that was kind of my goal, is like get through college, get a degree, and land a job and get to New York.
You wanted to scrap and shed the Minnesota nice outer shell for that East Coast vibe.
Well, it's funny because in Minnesota, I had never been called nice. My demeanor is I'm pretty direct. And when I'm in New York, people are like, you're so nice. And I'm like, where were you the first 22 years of my life? I really felt like I was at an identity crisis until I had moved to New York City.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you found your place out there, and I love New York too. I had the opportunity early in my career to manage a team of outside salespeople that were based in New York. So I got to go out once every 3 weeks, and I was at Groupon. So love it. Love the city, and I chose West Coast, but still, it's awesome there. So I want to take you back then, moving out of college. Obviously you took that first sales role. How was it for you to sell to senior decision makers as an individual contributor? Were you apprehensive? How did you deal with the apprehension? If you were, was it easy for you?
Yeah, let me give you some more context on my first role, because I think that would be important to this discussion. So I joined a Series A startup based out of New York. It was a fashion startup where the premise was small boutiques from all over the world would put their merchandise on one single platform, like an Amazon for boutique fashion. So I actually sold to small business owners. And for me, not quite an executive, but the executive of their small business. It was hard. I'm like a 22-year-old trying to tell this store owner that's been running their business for the last 10 years that they should spend, X amount to get onto our website and then a certain amount of commission for everything that's sold. And it was really scary at first, but practice makes perfect, I guess.
Yeah, no, that tends to be a common theme of you just kind of hustle, grind it out, make as many calls, talk to as many people as you possibly can until it just becomes, second nature for you. So moving on a bit, and I do want to talk about your start at Greenhouse. How did you find that company, and, why did you choose them as your next path?
Yeah, it's a great question, because this is a very formative experience for me and a very important moment in my life. So I left my first job because the company culture wasn't what I was looking for. It was very much a grind, like you said. I was in the office at 7 a.m., leaving at maybe 8. So culture was kind of non-existent. And so I made a very active choice to leave that company without a job lined up. I took 2 months off to find my next opportunity, with the focus really being on a great company culture that I wanted to grow at. I'd seen Greenhouse a few times, but it had never really registered on my radar. They were a very up and coming name 5 years ago. But my friend, who I had just met at my first company, actually left that company at the same time and applied for the SDR position at Greenhouse and did not get it. And she was like, Mariah, I know this sounds crazy. I didn't get this position, but you should still apply. This company is one of a kind. It's the best interview processes I've ever been through, and I think you'd really like it.
Wow.
But that's how I applied at Greenhouse.
That's awesome. I'm glad to see also that a applicant tracking system company has a great interview process. They certainly should practice what they preach, I imagine.
Yeah.
And you've been there for quite some time. So why have you stuck with it? And what about that company is particularly special?
Yeah. So cliche, but it's the people. we're a hiring company. So I guess like first and foremost, we stand behind our product. Our product helps you find the right people for your company. And thus we hire really great people at Greenhouse.
Yep.
And having the right talent really bleeds into everything. You'll have great leadership. You'll have leadership you want to work for. They make good decisions. Work becomes fun. You want to be around your coworkers. They're also smart. And so if you get the talent aspect right of your company, then the rest is like kind of history.
Awesome. That's great. And that's great advice to our folks who are looking at that first career. A lot of times you think, I just need to take what I can get and I need to jump into a company just because I've been in this interview process. And a lot of times it's not the case. And you really do need to think about it as I get to pick the folks that I'm around and the team that I'm around. So do take that time to understand, who is around you, and company culture and people at a company really mean almost everything.
100%. I really like that, because that's the advice I would give to new grads is like, as much as the company is interviewing you, you're also interviewing them. And just the same way you would follow your gut in like a relationship, like a romantic relationship, it's the same thing with the company. If you're getting bad vibes, follow that. Say no. I rejected 2 companies before I selected Greenhouse, and I was unemployed for 2 months. Like, some people would have just jumped on the first opportunity. If I took the first opportunity that I got an offer from after my first role, I probably wouldn't have had a job. I'm pretty sure that company is out of business. So just make sure that you trust your gut.
Yeah, that's great, Mariah. We've heard that, over and over and over again, but it's often overlooked and forgotten. Is you have to feel the right way about the company. If you feel a little off going into it, it may just start to fester, and you may continue to feel that way throughout the time there. I want to move into your career as a leader at Greenhouse. So what do you love about leadership, and more specifically about leading the team of sales development representatives over there?
Good question. So what do I love about leading? For me, as a female in sales, I love getting other people that are from different types of backgrounds into sales. I think that's very, very important. Sales is a high paying job, and it is typically, or has been up until really recently, kind of a male dominated field. That's and right. So what I love about leading a team is that I first am like a female sales leader, and second, have the ability to get people from diverse backgrounds onto the sales path. Because I do think it's such a lucrative path that has been closed off to different types of communities or minorities in the past.
That's awesome. Something that we particularly pay attention to here at Ramped, and I'm going to toot our own horns here for a little bit. At the top of our funnel, we aren't cutting anybody off through some sort of income sharing agreement or anything. There's no catch, no gotcha. It's all free. And I think it's just like it's an education thing. I think folks just need to be educated on the benefits of this type of career path, and that it's not necessarily, what you see in the movies, or the big male figure dominating a room or dominating a call. There's actually strategy. It's actually a job for everyone. Not just, like you said, it kind of still is, unfortunately, dominated, by males. So I think we're really focused on breaking that as well. And I'm inspired by your story and how you're able to take that and be such a proactive and really thoughtful leader.
That actually is what kind of drew me to Ramped, and why I really appreciate the product is that you guys do allow for discovery within the platform. I think that's something that's missing with a lot of your competitors in the market, right? Is the people that are coming to you don't necessarily know that they want a sales path yet. And that's part of the thing with tech is if you don't know anyone in tech, or you've never been in tech yourself, and you watch Silicon Valley, just to be cliche here, on HBO, you would think it's a bunch of white dudes in someone's house arguing over about like who's smarter. And that's not what it is. And so that's a big opportunity for Ramped, I think, is that discovery aspect, is that, maybe sales isn't right for this person, but they get to discover that on their own. They don't need to come to the table knowing that they want to do sales.
Yep, that's awesome. And yeah, that's very specifically what we're all about, is giving everybody access, letting them figure it out through the program. And at the end of the day, if they don't like it, great, learn on our dime, figure it out through Ramped. And, we'll hopefully put the folks who are interested in front of folks like great employers that can hire quickly and hire them into a culture that they feel really well supported by. So brings me to my next question, which I think is a good segue. What traits do you look for when you're hiring SDRs?
Yes, I love this question because it's so important. And we're pretty upfront about what we look for in an interview process too with our SDRs, because we're not trying to trick people. And I would say that most companies hiring for SDRs are looking for people with these traits as well. So it's not just greenhouse. The first is desire to be in sales. This job is a grind. And if you don't want to be in sales, it's going to be really hard to want to do it day in and day out. So the first is a desire to be in sales. Two is that work ethic component. You'll stop at nothing to get to your number and do whatever it takes. Third is coachability, takes feedback, knows how to implement it. And then this fourth one is maybe specific to like earlier stage startups or companies that don't quite have their sales process nailed down, is adaptability, right? Going with the flow, being able to be okay with change, not, I don't want to knock any companies, but there's like the Salesforces and the Oracles of the world, right? Like they know what they're doing. They're super successful companies. You make this many calls to this many people, you will probably get this much quota. Yep. That's not true at a lot of tech startups. So you have to be able to go with the flow.
Yep, that's great. That's great. And we hear that quite often as well, as advice and as things that they, SDR managers, SDR leaders look for, is that adaptability, flexibility. And you hit on one that I love, which is hunger and kind of tenacity and determination to just plow through the BS out there, whether it comes in rejection, the 90% rejection rate when you get on the phone call, or it comes in the face of changing goals, changing culture, changing whatever at a startup, especially a fast growing one like Greenhouse. What's one question that you ask every SDR interviewee when they're coming through your process at Greenhouse?
Yeah, this is a good question. What's the hardest thing you've ever done?
That's a great question. What's an answer from that question that you particularly love?
Well, what I'm looking for is interesting. One, what do they think is hard? Because there are a bunch of different types of hard, and sales is a specific type of hard. So I want to see how they define what hard is. And then two, I want them to show me a side of themselves that wouldn't necessarily come out if I asked them, like, tell me about a time you missed a goal. Like, I want to know something personal about them. So the best answers, give me insight into what they think is hard, and then also show me a personal side of, this is how I would be interacting with someone, or this is how I would be making a connection with them if they were to join the team.
That's awesome. And that's a question that we hear sometimes, but the way that you're using it in an interview flow, I think, is really unique. And I love that you asked that and look to get those types of information and those types of feedback out from the interviewee. What's one piece of tactical advice that you could share with our audience about interviewing for the SDR role in general?
So like something that they should be prepared for, a skill?
Yeah, so more on the interview process. Like, what's one thing that they should just expect to hit every time they're in an SDR interview?
Oh my gosh, I feel like SDR interviews are so cliche probably at this point. There's probably going to be like some sort of role play. For us, that's a voicemail exercise. For some companies, that's like a cold call. So you do need to have like some semblance of a company pitch down, and then just be ready, probably for the objections. No, we're not interested. Timing's wrong. We don't have budget. Then probably get asked questions about why sales. That's important. About a time that they missed a goal. And I think that covers like a lot of like probably 50 to 75% of the questions you'll be asked in any given interview process.
Yeah, the why sales one is super interesting. It is something that you hear often. The other thing that I'll say there is uh, it's a common question that people just fail, and it's a litmus test question. At least when I was interviewing, and I've hired and trained thousands of SDRs in my career, it'd be something that if they lost me at that question, I usually ask it quite right at the beginning. They couldn't really recover from it. I'm curious to know what you look for in an answer there, and if you use it somewhat similarly, as kind of that litmus test of, are they really interested in sales?
That's such a good question. And it's funny because I was speaking with my manager last week about how we both fell into sales. And we're like, if someone had asked us why sales in our first sales interview position, like, would we have answered that the way that we expect people to answer it today? And I don't think I would have nailed it in my interview process because I didn't really know what sales was.
Yep.
And so to that point, there's an attribute that we assess for, which is, do they have a consistent narrative? Does their story make sense? And so that's actually a little bit more about what I'm looking for. Like, I want to know what brought them to this point and what they plan on doing with this sales development role. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, sales development isn't a career path that someone usually embarks on to do forever.
Yep.
You rarely find what we call lifers in sales development, but sometimes you do.
Yep.
And so it's totally fine if sales isn't the end all be all goal, but I want to understand why. And behind that, it's like, what are the motivators? What are you going to do with that? And if sales isn't the long-term goal, how are you going to overcome the bad parts of sales, aka the rejection, the long days, the wrapping your head around quota, et cetera?
Great. Yep. That makes sense. It's kind of it's that catch-all question, right? It just gives you a lens into and a perspective into who they are, why they're here, and if they can make it past that like basic sales SDR grind. It's funny that you bring up the SDR lifers too. I've come across like a handful, let's call it like under 10, but they just love it. I don't know. I don't know why or how, but they're just like, they're so in it, and they hop from SDR job to SDR job, just crushing it along the way. And you can make pretty good money as a lifer SDR. And I'm curious to know, this is kind of off topic, but I'm curious to know if you feel like that could exist more in the future.
I think so. I think there's a real conversation to have in the tech world, especially sales tech, around compensation for SDRs. And I know there are some advocates on LinkedIn that speak about this a lot, about how there's such a mismatch between what we pay an SDR and an AE, but also the expectations that we hold SDRs to.
Yeah.
And so in a world where compensation starts to actually match the expectations that we want out of an SDR, I could see that becoming more of a lifelong career path. The same way that being an AE and selling enterprise SaaS software for 40 years is a career path that should exist on the SDR side as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm very bullish on SDR as a career, given a few things change compensation wise, and maybe spirit and attitude towards SDRs change. I think that's a reasonable approach to a long career in sales. Two more questions and I'll let you go. So one is, what's a common misstep that you see early career salespeople make, specifically as they're coming up in that career?
That's a good question. Probably trying to move on too fast, which I'm sure is something that other SDR leaders have spoken with you about as well. But just getting anxious to move on to that next step. I even remember when I 4 years ago at this point, 5 years ago, like I felt the same way, like, oh, I need to move on. And part of that is sales cultures within companies, right? Like they glorify the AEs and then they just tell the SDRs, like, slap on the back, great job, and keep it up, right? So like I get it. It's like psychologically speaking, like you think you need to move up to be valued, but then too, it's also on us to like understand how this role. Let me take a step back. How this role will like play in your career career path. Like if you're a good SDR, you can get access to all different types of the business while just like grinding out your process, right?
Yep.
So if like you're someone who's interested in product, sit in the SDR role, just do your job for 5 hours and then go the other 3, like go shadow your product people and then move into a product role. That's unheard of in other companies. So that was a bit of a long-winded answer, which is like, I understand the pressure to want to move up, but there's so much upside to staying in the SDR role.
Yep.
And just being good at it while exploring your career paths.
Yep. I love it. And certainly something we hear, we see. I'm sure I did in my first sales role too, is just like, want to get to the next really quickly. And that is, you're right. I think it's partially a culture thing, partially, for me at least, it was a lack of experience thing. I didn't really understand how companies worked, and I was watching my peers get promoted, and I was like, all right, my turn. So I think it's a little bit of both, and I agree with you. The SDR role, you should act like a sponge. You should soak up all the pieces of the business around you, and then if you crush it, you're able to pick what direction you want to go. You can go into marketing, you can become an AE, you can go into customer success. There's many opportunities. It could be Salesforce operations, sales ops, revenue ops. Like there's tons of directions you could take it by just sitting back, doing a really good job, doing your work and learning about a business and how it functions.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So last question for you. It's something we ask all our guests. If you could go back in time, now that you have the benefit of hindsight, what advice would you give a young Mariah, either coming out of school or before that, and why?
Well, it's funny that the second to last question was kind of like the advice that I wish I gave myself, which is slow down a little bit. But I mean, perhaps it's just like trusting the process, right? As long as you are making the best decision for yourself in the moment, like things will come together. There have been moments in time where I'm like, oh, the person next to me is getting promoted faster, or they're making more money, or they seem like they're catching the eye of our CRO or our CEO. Things ebb and flow. You have your highs, you have your lows, and it's about trying to live in that middle area of being content while also growing and recognizing the opportunity that you have right now. There's some people that have less experience than I do, and they're leading the entire sales development function, but perhaps they're at a 50-person company, right? I'm not quite the leader leading the entire SDR team at Greenhouse, but I oversee 11 people, including our EMEA side of the business that we're just starting to get off the ground. And so for me, the opportunity isn't like, oh, wow, I should be the head of an entire sales development team right now. It's like, what can I gain right now that I maybe wouldn't get if I jumped ship to another company where I could just lead the sales development function? So I think it's about slowing down and just like thinking about the opportunity in front of you in this moment in time.
That's awesome. Yeah. Exceptional advice. You don't hear it enough as a early career sales professional, and something that everybody can learn from and take to heart and improve their careers. Well, Mariah, this was super impactful. Our audience is going to absolutely love it. They're going to love your perspective on all things sales development, all things leadership, career path, and much more. So thank you so much for being on the How I Sell podcast. And we hope to have you on one day in the future again.
Thanks so much, Danny. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.